Okay, let's unpack something truly paradoxical. You've got Vatican City, right? The planet's smallest independent state, barely a square mile.
Tiny. Absolutely tiny.
Yet it throws this enormous shadow of influence across the globe. I mean, impacting everything from, deep personal beliefs to complex international diplomacy.
It really does.
Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through the sources so you don't have to, extracting the knowledge that, well, really matters.
And today, it's Vatican City.
Exactly. We're plunging into the history and significance of Vatican City, drawing on a pretty detailed historical overview we've got here.
Yeah, it covers a lot of ground.
Our goal is simple, but ambitious maybe, to understand how this seemingly insignificant patch of land became such a central pillar for religion, culture, and, well, global relations.
And right off the bat, there's something we need to get straight, isn't there?
Oh, definitely. It's crucial because it can be a bit confusing. We have the Vatican City State, that's the actual physical place, the territory, the governing bodies.
The 44 hectares.
Right. And then we have the Holy See, which is the Catholic Church's ecclesiastical government. It's sort of spiritual and temporal authority, much broader.
Keeping those two distinct is key. You really can't understand the complexities otherwise.
Absolutely. So where do we even begin? Before it was a state.
It's intriguing, yeah. Before Vatican City was formally a state, the very ground it sits on was already steeped in religious meaning. But, the earliest popes weren't actually buried where the big basilicas are now.
Oh, really? Where?
Their tombs were in the catacombs of St. Calixtus, actually some distance away. It was a gradual shift, really picking up steam under Popes Nicholas I and Gregory III. And that's when the focus moves to St. Peter's for, major papal burials.
Okay, that makes sense. A gradual consolidation.
And it's also interesting, St. Peter's Square itself, now this iconic Christian site, it apparently had echoes of pagan traditions in its early design elements.
Huh, didn't know that.
Then you get something like the Saracen invasion, a real crisis moment. But ironically, it sort of contributed to the papacy's growing temporal power. Events like the donation of Pepin in 756.
Right, Pepin the Short, king of the Franks.
Exactly. That wasn't just about getting land. It was a foundational step. It really helped establish the Pope as a secular ruler, not just a spiritual one.
So these early popes were laying the groundwork in multiple ways. Pope Gregory I, for instance. He wasn't just a spiritual leader. He was known for his learning, right? Gregory the Great.
A noted scholar, absolutely. Then you have Pope Leo I, Leo the Great, who was apparently quite skilled politically, negotiating territorial buffers, protecting the church's interests.
Smart maneuvering.
And even later, Pope Gregory III, the calendar guy.
Right, the Gregorian calendar.
He was also advocating for a degree of national autonomy within the kind of larger political structures of his time. It paints a picture of the papacy as this evolving thing, its influence spreading beyond just the spiritual.
So if we zoom out a bit, the Vatican area itself was already a big deal for pilgrims way back since Constantine's time.
Oh, yeah. Primarily because St. Peter's Basilica was believed to be, the site of St. Peter's martyrdom. That was the huge draw.
The core reason.
And even Roman emperors, before Christianity became dominant, they contributed art and decorations to these early Christian sites.
Interesting. So patronage even before conversion.
Then, as the Western Roman Empire started to, crumble, the church in Rome naturally gained prominence. People looked to it for stability, for leadership.
Filling a power vacuum in a way.
Exactly. And popes increasingly found themselves being asked to step into secular matters, mediating disputes, organizing defenses, which helped solidify their jurisdiction beyond Rome itself.
So initially, their spiritual clout was massive, undeniable, but the actual earthly power was, more limited?
In the very early centuries, yes. But then you get figures like Pope Gregory the Great, 6th, 7th centuries. He really starts asserting authority over parts of Italy, even lands further away.
And that must have caused friction.
Oh, definitely. It led to tensions, like disputes with the Patriarch of Alexandria, but it also drove missionary activities, expanding the church's reach. And as the church got more land through donations, Gregory's strong stance on papal authority certainly ruffled some feathers.
Okay, so this brings us to Emperor Constantine, a huge figure in this story. His Edict of Milan in 313. That was game changer, wasn't it?
Absolutely pivotal. It directly enabled the construction of the first Basilica of St. Peter over the traditional site of the tomb.
And his conversion. Was it genuine faith or more, political strategy? The source mentions unifying the empire.
That's the perennial question, isn't it? Maybe a bit of both. Unifying a vast, diverse empire under one religion is certainly a powerful political tool, Hard to deny the strategic element.
Makes sense. And as St. Peter's tomb gained importance, it naturally boosted the political status of the bishops in Rome, especially as Christianity became the favored, then official, religion.
Precisely. And even something like translating the Nicene Creed into Latin, that can be seen as an early sign of this growing political weight in the Western Latin-speaking part of the empire.
So let's shift gears to the Papal States. That whole era, what was the initial setup? Ties to Byzantium.
Right. Initially, the papacy had significant connections with the Byzantine Empire. Remember, Byzantium controlled Italy at the time, and they even appointed a governor for Rome.
So the Pope wasn't fully independent then?
Not initially. There were also internal issues, like the source mentions riots against Jewish communities in the 6th century. It gives you a sense of the sometimes volatile environment.
And the Exarchate of Ravenna, what was that?
That was the Byzantine administrative center in Italy. And technically, the Pope was initially subordinate to the authority of the exarchs based there.
But that didn't sit well for long, I imagine.
No. We see Pope Pelagius II trying to address abuses by these exarchs, and then Pope Gregory VIII apparently had a direct conflict with the exarchate. That definitely strained relations with the Byzantine court back in Constantinople.
And then the Lombards come into the picture.
Yes, the Lombard invasions added another layer of instability. They eventually captured Ravenna in 751. That was a huge blow to Byzantine power in Italy, and, crucially, it created a power vacuum.
A vacuum the papacy could potentially fill.
Exactly. The fall of Ravenna in the mid-8th century was a real turning point. It created the conditions for more independent political entities to emerge in central Italy.
Which leads directly to the formal creation of the Papal State.
Precisely. In 756, through that donation of Pepin we mentioned, the papacy gets a solid territorial base. And it kept expanding through other acquisitions. Even Rome itself came under papal control around 727.
So they're building this state, but the source stresses it wasn't exactly stable?
Far from it. Constantly vulnerable, powerful local nobles, independent officials. They were always a challenge. I mean, the source mentions Count Roger conquering parts of it in 1231. Even Rome itself wasn't always secure.
Periods of rule by barons.
Yes, these powerful Roman families often vied for control. It was a real back and forth until the church managed to consolidate its dominance more firmly, maybe around the early 17th century. A constant tug of war, like you said.
And getting control of the old exarchate lands, that took a while too.
Yeah, the source says it was gradually delivered over about half a century, often turbulent. Interestingly, under Gregory I, back in the 7th century, the papacy actually lost some territory and prestige, though key families in and around Rome held onto their influence.
Okay, let's focus on the political power itself. How did that evolve? The source mentions Constantine up to 1377.
Right, 1377 is when the papacy returned to Rome from Avignon. That whole period saw a gradual, though not always steady, increase in the temporal power claimed by the Holy See.
Were there challenges to this idea of the church wielding earthly power?
Oh, yes. The source mentions Marsilio of Padua, a medieval thinker who strongly argued against the church having temporal authority. But despite intellectual critiques like his, by the time you get to Pope Gregory VII in the 11th century...
Hildebrand, the investiture controversy.
That's the one. By then, the papacy had amassed considerable power, controlling a big chunk of central Italy. Real imperial clout.
And this power eventually clashed with Italian unification.
Massively. In the 19th century, the drive to unify Italy directly challenged the Pope's rule over the Papal States. The popes resisted fiercely, arguing it was their rightful territory based on history and, divine mandate.
They had theological arguments too, something about Vatican clauses.
Yeah, the interpretation was that these clauses granted the papacy universal spiritual powers, which, in their view, reinforced their right to earthly rule as well, to guarantee that spiritual independence.
Okay, then comes this huge shift. The Renaissance, the Baroque period. Suddenly it's all about massive, grand projects.
Really dramatic transition, and St. Peter's Basilica becomes the absolute centerpiece, the ultimate symbol of this new era. The source compares it to St. Paul's in London, but emphasizes St. Peter's is just vast, much larger.
What was the architectural vision?
It's described as this Greek cross layout, crowned by that incredible massive dome, all built right on the site of the first basilica over St. Peter's tomb. Remember that original simple wooden tomb? It was covered by a shrine, something even emperors revered.
And the result is just awe-inspiring.
Totally. Inside and out, the colonnades outside, the massive piers inside holding up the dome. It's designed to impress, a statement of faith and power in marble and gold.
And this period was also a cultural peak, late 15th, early 16th centuries.
The source calls it the zenith of the Vatican's political power. Yeah.
Yeah.
You had families like the Borgias pouring money into beautifying Rome, leaving this incredible artistic legacy.
And Pope Julius II commissioning Michelangelo for the new St. Peter's.
The famous commission, a project that took, what, over a century to complete? Just monumental ambition.
Were there other big projects?
Oh, yeah. Pope Sixtus V had this grand urban plan for Rome. They were even mining gold in the Papal States to help fund everything.
Tying gold. Wow.
And commissioning artistic giants like Caravaggio for his revolutionary Baroque frescoes, and later Bernini the Baldacchino over the altar, the fountain in St. Peter's Square. Just iconic stuff.
But this golden age couldn't last forever. Liberalism, nationalism, the French Revolution changes things.
Fundamentally, the popes found themselves reacting against these forces. Eventually, they were forced to give up their temporal power. First, Napoleon puts pressure on them, and then later, the Kingdom of Sardinia pushing for Italian unification.
So the final loss came in 1870.
Yes, when Italian troops occupied Rome, that effectively ended the 1,000-year run of the Papal States as a territorial entity. The Pope, Pius IX, famously declared himself a prisoner in the Vatican.
What an incredible arc, from consolidation to empire building to confinement within walls.
A huge historical shift. And if we jump ahead, the Vatican City State as we know it today didn't just pop into existence. The source uses the phrase demiurgic appearance in 1929.
Meaning it was sort of deliberately created?
By the Lateran Treaty, yes. And beyond its core religious mission, the Holy See today is active in global affairs, peace diplomacy, development aid, even supporting Italy's tourism.
And the state itself, Vatican City, manages all that incredible art and culture.
That's a huge part of its role, administering and preserving that immense wealth. The source mentions figures like around 1,800 employees, mostly lay people.
And the revenue. Museums must be a big part.
Pre-pandemic, around 400 million euros annually, with a large chunk from museum tickets, yes. Also real estate, donations.
The source quotes Roberto Borioni. What was his point?
That the art in the Vatican isn't just valuable territorially, it's interwoven with religious ritual, giving it this deeper, multi-layered meaning. It transcends just being art in a place.
And Piranesi's quote about beauty as refuge.
Yeah, highlighting the sort of ethical, aesthetic, cultural, even inspirational impact of the place. It offers something beyond the everyday.
Let's go back to that moment, the loss of the Papal States in 1870. 1,000 years of history ending.
It's staggering to think about. And the source emphasizes how many different forces were at play: political, economic, social, religious, ideological changes, plus internal church factors, all converging to transform the church's nature and powers.
And popes were always juggling, right? Spiritual leader versus secular ruler.
A constant balancing act. And watching the step-by-step dismantling is fascinating. Sardinia annexing territories from 1860.
Garibaldi marching up from the south.
Right, further isolating Rome. Pope Pius VI and Francis II of the Two Sicilies protested loudly, but Austria, who might have helped, couldn't intervene effectively.
So Victor Emmanuel II just went for it.
He formally proposed annexation, and interestingly, taking Rome meant he effectively dropped his old title, King of Sardinia, to become King of a unified Italy.
There's that French quote in the source. What's the gist?
It reflects on the uniqueness of the Papal State, this theocratic entity, geographically tiny, yet wielding immense global religious influence. Ancient yet modern, always observed, never truly possessed by another power. It captures that paradox.
And digging into why papal power rose and fell. It's complicated.
Incredibly. Politics, economics, social shifts, religious ideas, internal church politics. It's a mix of everything. And that core debate about church independence from state control runs through it all.
The source mentions orthodoxy emerging and the church's early theocratic authority declining by the 16th century.
Yes, the initial dominance in the West gradually weakened, facing challenges like the Reformation. The formal end of the Papal State was even acknowledged later at Vatican II.
And Napoleon's impact again.
Huge. His conquests forced major concessions from Pius VI. Then Pius VII was actually imprisoned by Napoleon for a time, which further diminished papal prestige.
Followed by the 1860 annexation and Pius IX becoming the prisoner of the Vatican.
Right. The source even hints that some of Pius IX's earlier reformist ideas got sidelined later by a more authoritarian regime that took hold within the Vatican state structure itself.
And the core issue remained: independence from civil control.
In all sorts of areas, education, marriage, law, the church often struggled giving contradictory responses to modern challenges.
Which brings us neatly to the Lateran Treaty, The solution, supposedly.
Well, it resolved the Roman question, yes. But the negotiations were incredibly complex and drawn out after 1870. They basically hit an impasse by the early 1920s.
What broke the deadlock?
A strange convergence, really. The rise of Mussolini's fascism in Italy and the papacy's own strong anti-socialist, anti-communist stance. Both sides saw a potential benefit in reaching an agreement.
So necessity brought them together.
You could say that. And once the real talks started, they moved relatively quickly, leading to the signing in February 1929.
And the treaty did what, exactly?
Fundamentally, it recognized the Church, or the Holy See, as independent and sovereign. In return, the Holy See gave up its claims to the old Papal States and acknowledged Rome was part of Italy.
And Vatican City was created.
Yes. Established as a tiny, separate state under the Holy See's sovereignty. Plus, the Church got financial compensation for the lost territories. And importantly, the Concordat part of the treaty laid out the ongoing relationship between the Church and the Italian state.
Interesting point about Pope Pius XI, maybe admiring some aspects of Mussolini's regime.
Yeah, the source suggests he might have seen fascism as a strong force against communism and secularism, things he deeply opposed. Mussolini, for his part, saw the political advantage of making peace with the powerful Catholic Church.
A pragmatic deal on both sides, then.
It seems so. It settled the immediate issues and allowed the Vatican to formally set up its foreign relations structure. The signing itself in the Lateran Palace was a major historical moment.
Were finances a big sticking point in the talks?
They were definitely part of it. Valuing the old church lands, dealing with existing debts, legal complexities too, and by giving up temporal rule, the Vatican lost that potential tax revenue from the former Papal States.
If we look way back, comparing early persecution with Christianity becoming the state religion, that's a huge shift.
Massive. From hiding in catacombs to emperors building grand basilicas, wealthy citizens converting their palaces into churches, new relics emerging, more churches being built.
Constantine's mother, Helena, building the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem.
Right. A key moment. And as pagan temples crumbled, you even see old symbols being repurposed. The goddess Roma becoming a symbol for ecclesiastic Rome.
And churches getting imperial status, even defensive roles.
Yes, integrating into the fabric of the empire. But interestingly, while the foundations for church states were laid, the great centers, Jerusalem, Constantinople, Rome, ended up as capitals of other nations. The West went to the Franks, setting a different course for Europe.
Okay, jumping to the 20th century. After World War I, the Papal State is just the tiny Vatican area.
Pretty much. The Pope's direct temporal rule was effectively over. Negotiations started with Italy after the war to figure out a new relationship because having no formal ties was awkward internationally.
And the Vatican's attitude towards Mussolini's fascism shifted.
Initially resistant, but it softened by the mid-1920s, leading up to that 1929 Lateran Treaty. The source mentions a correction made about the Treaty of Nicaea in the official documents, interestingly.
Pius VII was seen as the Pope who secured this deal.
Yes, he's widely credited. Memorials were built. His funeral was a huge international event, showing the papacy's global standing. Leaders from all over came.
And Pius XII received the Silver Keys, symbolizing the transition.
Exactly. The start of the modern Vatican City State era.
How did Vatican City navigate the world wars? Being founded just before WWI.
It declared neutrality. And being so small, it mostly avoided direct physical damage. The Holy See was diplomatically active, trying to broker peace, promoting international cooperation, but hopes for the League of Nations didn't really pan out.
And World War II, more complex.
Much more. Nazi Germany was the biggest crisis. Neutrality was complicated by the Concordat with Mussolini and the role of Christian Democrats in Italy. The source calls it a mixed period, some quiet Catholic resistance, but also a sense of relative impotence on the world stage. Embarrassing, perhaps.
The post-war era then became crucial for rebuilding influence.
Absolutely. The world had changed dramatically. US-USSR rivalry, decolonization, shifts in Asia, plus social changes, secularization, mass culture. The church needed to adapt.
What were the priorities?
Gaining recognition as an equal state, improving public relations. Pope Pius XII worked on modernizing diplomacy, building alliances, especially with newly independent Christian nations.
Navigating the Cold War must have been tricky.
Very. Dealing with the superpowers, handling situations in annexed territories, UN missions in Asia. Pius XII's papacy stressed the impermanence of earthly power, focused on hopes for peace. And it started championing freedom of conscience, laying groundwork for Vatican II.
So Vatican II wasn't just out of the blue.
No, the source emphasizes continuity, from Pius XII to John XXIII. Preparations were already underway when John XII was elected.
What was his goal?
A universal council, all bishops together, formulating binding doctrine and pastoral statements. Not intended as conflict, but a broad church conference aiming to write a universal tale for the modern world.
Do they know exactly what would come out of it?
Apparently not. The program was quite open initially. John XXIII had been engaging with other Christian communities beforehand. The key themes emerged during the sessions, guided, as the source puts it, by the Spirit.
And the timing coincided with Cold War tensions.
Yes, and John XXIII's role in the Cuban Missile Crisis was seen as crucial, both for world peace and for allowing the council to continue.
Let's talk about the modern Vatican, functioning like a state.
Very much so. After Pius XI, and especially under Pius XII, it developed its administrative, diplomatic, judicial systems, precise internal rules, its own police force, the Swiss Guard.
Vatican radio media connections.
Right. All the apparatus of a state, albeit a unique one.
And its diplomatic role during the Cold War.
Interesting position. Its unique religious nature gave it influence, even in the Soviet bloc. But its historical stance towards other religions maybe limited its reach in a pluralizing world.
So Vatican II happened amidst these global tensions.
Yes, and the televised opening generated huge public interest.
Culturally, its influence is undeniable. Art, architecture.
A center of Western civilization. That incredible concentration of art contributes to the image of the Vatican Empire, this idea of immense power. Traditions like the Way of the Cross also resonate deeply.
Contrasting images, though, worldly versus secluded and holy.
Exactly. And local legends, extraordinary stories add to the mystique. Even the olive branch symbol linking to the Jewish people. And St. Peter's Basilica itself, 2 millennia of history embodied in stone.
But modern Vatican City faces challenges. Financial issues.
Yes, the source mentions post-WWII arrangements with the Italian Treasury for wages, a disputed loan. While initially sound, it apparently faced financial disasters in the late 70s and now carries significant debt. Concerns about due process and dealings with banks are also raised.
And the history of papal finances is complex.
Very, especially in the 16th, 18th centuries. Context is key. Relations with neighbors, counter-reformation costs, political fragmentation, ambitious rulers, internal factions, high military and diplomatic expenses.
Tax collection was hard.
Yes, in a fragmented, less developed territory. It required a sophisticated state apparatus and careful monetary policy. The source asks how the church built a state powerful enough to protect itself, possibly leading to a theocratic system.
And sadly, scandals and controversies, too.
Unfortunately, yes. These have caused global tensions. The source lists several: the death of John Paul I in 78, Emanuela Orlandi's disappearance in 82, the assassination attempt on John Paul II in 83.
With conspiracy theories attached.
Often, yes. Also, things like the cash payoffs in the Philippines in 94, ongoing questions about financial transparency despite cash inflows, inequities in spending.
Arrests of officials in 2013.
For revealing secret documents, yes. The source suggests these scandals impact discussions, raise concerns about secrecy affecting well-being, and highlight the overlap between modern states and privatized finance.
So, looking at Vatican City today, a long way from Gregory I farm.
Absolutely. Palaces built, sacked, rebuilt. Tiber canals, Pius VII draining marshes, acquiring lands later lost. Pius IX calling papal territory guilty. Italian seizures. Leo III fighting enmity. Pius VII negotiating the pacts.
Then relative calm post-war, apart from audiences.
Largely. Now seen as a holy place for pilgrimage. The church acknowledging past sins, seeking forgiveness. A place needing tranquility where time feels different.
Bustling population, clergy custodians, gardens.
A unique atmosphere, sacred and civil. Beyond just tourism numbers. Still the world's smallest state, church HQ, diplomatic player, monetary system, realm of inquiry into the divine.
Its perception has evolved massively.
From persecution site to global center. Popes exiled, property confiscated. A long history of resistance and survival.
What about the future? Potential reforms.
The source suggests comparing Vatican injustices with other states cautiously, maybe promoting tolerance, free thought, even mentions reproductive rights initiatives back in 1834, and the need for credibility and documented accusations against clergy, perhaps using independent investigative bodies.
And its global role continues.
Definitely. Vatican City and the Holy See, 2 sovereign entities. Pope as church leader and monarch. Holy See active in international relations, neutral since 1798. ambassadors, treaties.
Diplomacy focused on peace, development, human rights.
Yes, through the Secretariat of State, the nunciatures, initiatives like interreligious dialogue, disarmament conferences, observer status at the UN, promoting human rights remains central.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's been quite a journey.
From early Christian sites to a sovereign state, navigating politics, culture, challenges, that distinction Vatican City State versus Holy See really is crucial.
And despite its tiny size, its global influence, historically and now, is just immense, multifaceted.
Undeniable.
It leaves you wondering, doesn't it, thinking
Yeah.
about this long, complex history, what's the single most significant factor behind its continued relevance today? Is it faith, politics,
Wow.
culture, diplomacy?
Plus some unique blend of all of them.
Yeah, exactly. It's something for all of us to think about.